Well, to be fair, I don't know if anything I encountered could be supernatural or not. When you work and study in a museum, you're often exposed to really harsh chemicals that can be very dangerous if not handled carefully. The place I was at was a dinosaur and ice age museum connected to a small community college. I spent my time studying at college and volunteering at the museum a lot. What I'm giving here is my best memories of things I saw and heard about in the area during that time. So I guess I'll start from school and work my way out. The school owned a building that used to be the small town's hospital. That was pretty much the only place in town that had the facilities necessary to host an Ice Age lab. What had been the old morgue had been converted into a paleo lab, and the body freezer was now home to several mammoths, mastodons, and a woolly rhino or two. We had several workbenches where we would take the dinosaur bones that would be gathered from the surrounding desert and clean the rock matrix off of them. We would assemble the bones and glue them together with Paleo Bond, which I hope is still being made because it was the most awesome glue ever, and if needed, apply a clear lacquer coat on the bones. We would build armature frames so that other schools and museums could acquire and display the skeletons. It was a lot of fun and a lot of hard work. We used the carts they used to ferry the bodies around the morgue to hold bigger bones like brachiosaur leg bones, and we had a few huge pelvic bones that weighed a couple hundred pounds. We had a lot of storage space and lots of large tool chests that had been put there with individual locks on every drawer and door. The shelves were lined with foam and rubber to protect the bones. Every now and again we'd have to inventory the collection and we'd go get different specimens for the paleontologists to study. One night when I was there late, I was putting some projects that we'd all been working on into the lockable area. Since I was the last one there, I had the job of going through the whole storage area and making sure that all of the drawers are closed and locked. Then I had to open the deep freeze room to make sure the doors were pressurized and to smell for decomposition to make sure the temperature hadn't gotten too high for the mammoth carcasses. I'd gone about all of my rounds and looked back down the hallway to double check in case one of the drawers was still open. And all of the drawers were open. Every single one of them. It took hours to go through them again, close, lock, and verify them all. When I was done, I came back out to the main area and watched the negative pressure sealed doors to the body freezer room open themselves. The doors were big enough that I had to close them to be able to get out of the storage area. When I pushed on them, they swung closed easily, but there was a vacuum system specifically designed to keep the doors closed and sealed to keep the cold in that room. Tools would often go missing, but I always chalked that up to other students being careless with equipment, until tools would start disappearing from your own workstation and no one else was in the building. That I couldn't explain so easily. I never saw anything stranger than that, but several other students and the paleontologists themselves talked about seeing shadows of people standing at the freezer doors, or the outlines of people in the dark corners of the room as if it happened all the time. Several had names, but I had never heard of any of the named ghosts being malicious directly. One student claimed that she had seen several instances of ghosts trying to trap her in the paleo lab. She described in detail the lab doors slamming and locking themselves shut when she was the only one there. After a few moments of that, she would hear whispers and occasionally feel tugs on her clothes. She very suddenly stopped working on dinosaur bones entirely one day and refused to talk about why. But the rest of the building that housed the paleo lab was also used by classrooms by college, and we noticed, commented, and asked her why she wouldn't sign up for classes in that building. She wouldn't even give us a verbal response. She'd just shut up and leave the room. The museum itself has some strangeness to it too. I had heard about a lot of different things happening there. The museum was one of the only museums in the world to have several full sets of Paleo Native American clothes, not just a scrap or two. We're talking about 10,000 plus years old. From time to time, they would dress a mannequin in one of the sets of clothes and put them on display to the public. That would usually be when the stories would start. Visitors would start asking why we had actors in regalia hanging around the museum when we didn't. Volunteer staff would report seeing an Indian chief, as they put it, wandering around the Hall of Man. The building was very well made, but when the clothes were out on display, power fluctuations would happen. The staff, including myself, that happened around the most wouldn't talk about the stories of the place, knowing that people will see what they want to see, hoping that no one would see anything. But someone always did. The only thing I ever came close to calling paranormal was after I'd been helping with a new display that had involved a lot of spray paint and glue. I left our work area to go get some paint and walked through the connecting area in the Hall of Dinosaurs to the Hall of Men to get to our storage room. It's separate from the paleo lab in the building, and saw several figures standing in the middle of the room. When I walked in, it seemed like they looked at me and screamed, but there was no sound. Then they began to elongate and stretch like pulled black smoke and disappeared. I figured it was a hallucination from too many spray paint fumes, but others who had clear heads reported similar cases elsewhere in the museum too. Often, it was the Hall of Dinosaurs where we get reports of a Native American dressed person being seen in the reflection of the glass display cabinets, only for no one to be there when the person turned around. One woman I knew who was very good friends with many of the professors was convinced that the entire area was close to some kind of gateway or portal to somewhere not so nice. But I figured she was kind of a hippie and probably a little too into the new age spirit seeing scene in the area. Okay, so that's the kind of place the college was situated in. So now we'd go out on expeditions to look for dinosaur bones, and we were always warned to keep a gallon of water with ourselves at all times. The desert there is extremely harsh, one of the worst in the world. During the summer, heat stroke and dehydration were serious issues, and two of the most common killers by far. They would bring several times more water in big storage trucks than we actually needed to drink. We used some to make plaster jackets for the bones we were digging, but the rest was used to towel ourselves down to cool off in the midday heat. The night was the exact opposite, and we all had below zero gear for sleeping. Exposure was a real threat at all times. If anyone was seeing things, they immediately had to report it and take a break. I just thought that meant dehydration or heat hallucinations, but things started to happen. A lot. The first things we started seeing were shadows on the horizon. When these would be spotted, the paleontologists would try to get us to work as hard and fast as we could. It never failed when we saw those shadows. Black market looters would roll into the area they figured we were at, and they would try to loot whatever they could. Bones were good, but archaeological finds were the best, and if we didn't pack up and move to somewhere other than where we were digging, we get raided at night. The poachers were always heavily armed, and would shoot at anything they thought moved. We didn't set lookouts one day and didn't catch the shadows on the horizon. We cooked up dinner at the end of the day, showered, sponged clean, and packed up for the night to go to sleep, only to wake up in the middle of the night to hearing gunfire and for a couple of bullets to hit one of the water trucks and punch a few holes in one of the tanks. We scrambled to pack up and abandon the dig. Most of the time, nothing would be taken because black market buyers want intact bones and skulls. Most of what we were collecting had broken in the decomposition fossilization process and wasn't easily recognizable to the untrained. We would hear random screams that sounded like someone being murdered. We figured it was probably mountain lions that had wandered down the mountains, but after a while, screams started coming closer to the dig site. The leaders and paleontologists would start getting nervous and making sure everyone was huddled around the inside boundaries of the digs. I figured it was just to keep the coyotes and the mountain lions away from the stray volunteers who could get hurt. Besides looters, nighttime had other terrors though. massive centipedes, field mice, and rats that could potentially carry the Black Plague, and ticks that could give you Lyme disease. We had to check each other for ticks at the end of every day. If we'd seen a lot of skunks and coyotes a couple of 100 meters from the camp, we'd have to check each other at every meal. It's amazing how fast you get used to being naked around people you've never met before. The first time someone turns up with a tick on them, and the Forest Service EMT that is assigned to your dick side has to remove the tick and administer whatever it is they do to prevent Lyme disease. Male, female, gay, straight, doesn't matter. Look at my ass all you want. I don't want Lyme disease. But when the sun went down, life started crawling out of every nook and cranny in the desert. If you shine the flashlight around the outside edge of the site, you see the reflections of light from thousands of nocturnal eyes looking your way. Mostly spiders and tarantulas, but it was pretty common to see desert foxes, coyotes, skunks, lizards, and rattlesnakes. There was a strict rule of the buddy system at night. Even if you had to go to the bathroom, your buddy would have to get up at night to go sit next to you in the too-wide porta potty while you pooped, and you for them. From time to time though, the animal sounds would just cut out. The desert would go completely silent. Usually one of the paleontologists would get on a loudspeaker and state that everyone was to stay in their tents at all times. No one was to go outside for any reason until the animals started making noise again. One fellow who'd been volunteering for years told us that he'd been hiking out in the desert decades before and had lost track of time. Easy to do that in the desert heat. He'd gotten caught out on some of the bare rock areas without a sleeping bag or tent. He started gathering up what little material was there to make some semi-warm bedding for himself to bed down for the night and started to get comfortable. He woke up in the middle of the night when he realized that the desert around him was totally and completely silent. He started looking around but couldn't see far, so he scrapped together some dry grasses and an old branch or two that he could scavenge and lit a fire with his lighter. He said that a bunch of hunched human-like creatures with pale skin and very thin sort of started looking and scampered away from the firelight. He described them as having longer arms than us and kind of walk hopping on all fours. Their heads were human-like, but the skin was pulled tight and there were sores all over their hairless bodies. He gathered materials to keep the fire going all night and stayed awake. He didn't see them all night, but the moment he started nodding off to sleep, he'd hear scampering noises and wake up to see the feet of one or more scrambling away from the firelight, back to where he couldn't see. He stayed up all night like that and was able to make it back to his car by morning. There were no known bears in the area or large mammals of any kind with the exception of the random lost mountain lion or mustang. But on the nights when the desert went silent, we would wake up to find the nozzles for the water trucks had been tampered with and small footprints that looked kind of human all over the campsites. Another danger was the archaeological sites. There were paleo-native kiva cities scattered around the desert. The area had been grassland as little as 500 years ago, and different people from different areas had settled there. Paleo-natives and Anasazi mostly. The problem was that their buildings were either cliff dwellings or kivas on the ground. The villages were small enough that it was pretty easy to tell that those people were still part of nature and not free from the food chain. Their kivas were dug into the tops of small hills, and wooden logs were assembled on their tops with woven grasses, then covered with dirt, and they sometimes even planted bushes or trees on or near them to camouflage them. You never knew what was a hill and what wasn't. I was out scouting with one of the paleontologists just outside of the dig site, and left his side for a moment because I really had to pee. I went to the other side of the hill we were standing next to get some privacy, and when I got to the top of the hill, it collapsed under me. I fell about 9 feet and sprained both my ankles and knees pretty badly coming down. I'm lucky I didn't break anything. It was pitch black and dusty inside. I started coughing immediately. The paleontologist climbed to the top as quickly and carefully as he could and shouted down to me to not move, but most importantly to stay in the light no matter what. He radioed the rest of the group to get a rope and help, and everyone rushed over to rescue me. After my ears stopped ringing from the fall, I realized I could hear the paleontologist screaming at me to stand up to get my whole body in the light. I pulled my arms and legs in closer to me, and I was hurting a lot until I hear something scurry in the dark. I've been around mice and rats, badgers and skunks and other small animals before. I knew what they sounded like. This sounded significantly bigger. I got a huge dump of adrenaline and pulled myself to my feet as fast as I could and stood in the middle of the sunlight coming in through the hole my body had made in the ceiling. I could hear breathing and heavy flash on rock slapping in the dark. It felt like hours, but in just a few minutes the others had arrived and lowered a rope for me. I tied myself a climber seat and they hauled me out. When the lead paleontologist was there to help pull me free, they had the most experienced people there waiting to be lowered into the kiva. While the EMT was looking me over, the paleontologist said, "Do you think there's any good items to find down there?" He was really excited. There was something down there with me. I kind of half shouted, "It's not safe." He became very stern and got very close to me and said, "Listen, there was nothing down there with you. It's safe." I started to protest, but he said, "Those guys are professionals. It's safe. You're safe. We are safe. Do you understand?" I just nodded and let the EMT work. After a few minutes, they lowered one of the archaeologists who had come with us down in the kiva. We heard a gunshot a few minutes later and heard the archaeologist shout, it's okay, it's just a desert rat." Desert rats only get about a foot long in that part of the country, and what was in there was significantly bigger. Normally, when we'd stumble across kivas, the archaeologists would have everyone help out with the materials they needed to collect whatever they could find in the huts. But this time, only the most seasoned staff went in, and no one was allowed near the entrance overnight. I'd heard the term desert rat a lot from the Forest Service personnel and from the museum and volunteer staff. It definitely means something else. Alright guys, so I've got a friend who used to intern at a museum, and he used to tell me all sorts of creepy things that he would experience at the museum after the normal operating hours. This story reminded me of many of his stories, and even though at the time I thought it was all in his head and he was just imagining things, after this story, I feel the urge to talk to him again about his experiences. I'll try to get him to write a few things and see if I can make a video out of it. Thanks for watching. Stay safe.